Brett, you have shown the impressive change in Perth Airport, and when I came to Australia in 2010, it was booming very much, and today it's more. The impression is that you have much less passengers there. So now your owner will, after the investment, will look for returns and growth. What are your growth levers really?
I think the important thing to point out about Perth Airport and actually all of Australia's large capital city airports is they're a shining example that privatisation of those sorts of assets is good public policy. They consistently benchmark, Australia's airports consistently benchmark globally as low cost and productive and giving an acceptable level of service. In terms of our shareholders, our shareholders, 80% of the shareholding, when you analyse it, is either Australian superannuation funds or the Future Fund on behalf of the public of Australia. And the marriage between those sorts of funding sources and the airport is a happy one, in that when we do require capital, we require lots of it. And they're there, they've got significant inflows. But they do expect a satisfactory return on the investment. And effectively, we contract with the airlines to recover that capital plus a reasonable return on the investment. And we get an opportunity to reset our prices in negotiations with the airlines. We will reset the prices based on the prevailing passengers at the time. I didn't put passenger forecasts up because they're not overly reliable, let me say that politely. So the bottom line is it's volatile and uncertain. To give you an idea of the productivity of our airport, we are the second lowest cost airport for airport in Australia for airlines to turn around an international aircraft, and we're 30 to 40% lower in cost than Brisbane and Sydney, and that's important when you're engaging in a globally competitive environment such as tourism.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? There's one in the back.
Matt from Business... Gee, that's loud, isn't it? Matt from Business News. I had a question, and any of the panellists can feel free to answer it if they wish. We've heard a lot about Western Power lately. I'd be curious if anybody would be interested or has thought about any other state assets that could be sold, like the Water Corporation or even part of the housing stock. Just interested. Thanks.
Yeah, I answered that. We looked at, had outside consultants look at all the assets. Water Corp is difficult in the sense that it does integrate, it's an integrated monopoly. It deals with a real scarce resource that has to be socially managed, that is our water. We are going through a transition of drying climate, so it's transitioning from capture to, let's say, desal and recycling. So it's a very difficult asset to sell. Some states have actually leased back desal and other sewage things. We looked at that, we put it aside. Water Corp is not there. It requires all sorts of contestability. Housing stock. We have in Western Australia invested very heavily with the Rudd government's assistance back in the GFC into social housing, very substantially. Much of that was through nonprofit organizations and other ones. So we have and the Department of Housing enters into all sorts of joint ventures with private sectors. So a large amount of our social housing stock is actually in private, nonprofit, and joint venture hands. So we've already done quite a bit of that. Where we did provide assistance to housing was Keystart. Well, Keystart was a program that has a stock of just south of $5 billion in debt. And we use that Keystart to assist people with lower deposits to get in new properties. And as I said, we're securitizing the debt on that, or doing the equivalent to it. But Keystart will remain the contact with the loan owners. So we've done a lot of innovation on housing, much more than other states. And we do have Homes West homes with those, but the clients there don't have the money to buy them.
Okay, there's a question here.
It's John Steen from the Australian Institute of Business and Economics. Just thinking about reflecting on some of the conversations this morning, there isn't actually an innovation sector. Infrastructure is incredibly important to Australia. And I'm thinking about what can we learn from what's happening overseas in more innovative infrastructure, more intelligent infrastructure, and the importance of different delivery models, thinking about what's going on in the UK. So I guess my question is for the panel. What are the possibilities here in how we can not just do more infrastructure, but do better and more innovative infrastructure?
Yeah. Maybe Brad can comment on that, because the airport's one of our most important infrastructures. And up until now, we've gained, take Western Power. It is it's very extensive, Western Power's network. It goes out into the wheat belt. It was really expanded in the 60s and 70s when you electrified the rural areas. And it is just a traditional poles and wire company. Well run, but a traditional one. And now, if you talk with the people who run it, the level and wave of technology that's impacting that industry, as Axel indicated, is phenomenal. I don't understand some of it, and some of it will work, some of it won't. So there's huge risk-taking on this. And, government entities don't like to take too much risk because failure is not well accepted in the public. So there are a whole raft of areas, from medicine to energy generation and transmission and transportation, that are being revolutionized now. And often infrastructure is stuck in the past and lacks innovation on these things. It's something that requires, in my view, the public sector to step back and identify its niche, so the private sector, who can take risk and accept failure, because it will happen, can come forward and maybe complete that type of infrastructure.
Thank you.
Is it on? No. I'd just say that, these new technologies are changing, reducing transactions costs, so about what exchanges can take place, so we can share things that we didn't share before. And that challenges the whole notion of public sector infrastructure, because it's there because the markets weren't working, but now you can have markets where you didn't have them before. And so, going to that point of Mike's. Yeah.
There's one more question here.
Thank you. John Langlet from CEDA. It seems that when you step into these roles, you have the Liz Ritchie hangover of asking the most number of questions at any CEDA event. But thank you all for your presentations. Peter Van Onselen this morning said that the reform of the Federation looks like it's fallen off the political agenda, particularly the federal agenda. And Lisa, I was struck by your chart. I wasn't surprised by it, I might say, where stamp duty was sitting on the right-hand side of the most inefficient taxes and the anti-growth taxes which we have available. So it looks like GST's off the agenda, Treasurer, so there's no mechanism now to really argue for redistribution issues. So is the Federation debate dead? Is the business community going to lobby really hard for some changes in the Federation structures, particularly around taxation? And Lisa, I was impressed by your call for a review of expenditure policy, which hasn't actually occurred since the government abolished the National Reform Council. And Treasurer, would you contemplate the acceptance of a share of the income tax base so you could get rid of some of your very high nuisance and inefficient taxes?
John, of course, is not a poorly informed person, and I thought he would come to that. The business sector hasn't supported reform of federalism for 30 years. The Business Council, I'm not picking on Lisa's group, but big international businesses basically see Western Australia as a national market, and these federalism in these states as anachronisms to hopefully do away with. So, and they're wrong. Actually, they can be and have been innovation hubs. So I get that whinge out of there. out of the way. Yes, GST is probably off. Someone chickened out along the way. I give you the reason why. Too many of my colleagues from the eastern states started talking about increasing GST by 50%, from 10% to 15%, and talking about it flooding their coffers with more money. Nothing. And Morrison and Turnbull said, we're not going to take the pain of raising the tax just to pay your costs. So that crewed that. Unfortunately, I was on the side of the right and mighty and said GST should be raised by 12.5%, but no additional collection of additional money. It was all about tax efficiency, not tax collections. We lost that debate. But this debate isn't over with. There are many ways to skin a cat, and we're chasing the cat. It's a big cat, too, and it hisses. And John, you raised the issue. The big issue in federalism has been since the Fraser's reform, I think, of 78, and then Hawke's new federalism of 88, 89, which was to copy the Canadians and give the states a surcharge, an income tax. They should not, will not control the base or overall rate, but have that. And that was one of the positive aspects of this debate, where Jay Weatherall, the Premier of South Australia, suggested it, and well, I understand they're looking at it. Now, he did it for good reason. For him, the average income tax collections in South Australia are 34% below New South Wales and ours, and if he got a per capita share, he'd get a bunch more money. You know, this Paul Keating's statement of never getting between a Premier and a bucket of money, if you see a bucket of money between Jane Weatherall, run like hell. But the income tax is still there, and it is the big kahuna in terms of reform. How far we get to it, don't know. But we're chasing that cat.
Thank you. So time is up for questions. Challenging times, we've all heard that. And one thing is sure, we will pull through these challenging times. Thanks to the speakers. First to Lisa for sharing the BCA view, then Brett, the impressive investment in Perth Airport and the changes here, and then Mike for sharing with us that you sleep very, very well and that you probably have the most easiest treasurer job in Australia. So before I hand back to Alana, join me thanking the speakers.